Hi again, and welcome to the Covert Investigation channel. Here I have another story for you, which I do hope you will enjoy. I would like to also thank you for your interest in my channel, as it's very much appreciated. And if you like the story, could you please subscribe and ring the bell, as it helps the channel to grow. And once again, thank you. Welcome back, as we explore part 2 of the Lord Lucan case. The story is then picked up by the witnesses, who were innocently hoisting flagons in a pub called the Plumber's Arms. Just 30 yards from the Lucans' front door. An extraordinary thing happened in the Plumber's Arms at around 9:45 during that night. The door was thrown open and a small woman in a nightdress burst in drenched in blood from head to foot. She was screaming, "Murder, murder, I think my neck has been broken." "He tried to kill me," she went on to say, according to reports from these witnesses. "I think I'm dying. Please look after my children." And she made it clear that the nanny had been murdered and the children were still in the house with the murderer. Unfortunately, no one in the pub thought this was a good enough reason to spring out to protect the children, or otherwise to right the wrong that had so obviously been done. However, if the pub drinkers had poured out and rushed the 30 yards to Lady Lucan's house, there might be no mystery to solve. They might have apprehended whoever it was in the house. That person could have been given a proper trial, and the matter would have been effectively brought to an end. As it was, the people in the pub stayed put and called the police like responsible citizens. The police, who first arrived at Lady Lucan's house, found the front door locked. Once inside, they discovered Sandra Rivet's body, still warm and still doubled up in the mailbag. There was an awful lot of blood concentrated mainly in 2 areas in the basement breakfast room, and on the stairs at the ground floor hall. The pool of blood in the breakfast room had within it fragments of smashed teacups and saucers. On the ground floor, the police located an object that had the look of a murder weapon, a 9-inch length of lead pipe, wrapped in adhesive tape, covered in blood and curved and twisted by the heavy work it had done that night. Upstairs in Lady Lucan's bedroom was more blood, particularly on a well-soaked towel that lay across the pillows on the bed. On the next level were the children, luckily unharmed, the 2 younger ones asleep but the 10-year-old still wide awake and wide-eyed, staring back at the police in front of a TV set that was blasting out at near full volume. Lady Lucan spent the next 6 days in the hospital. She had passed out in the pub, later arriving at the emergency room in deep shock, suffering from 7 blows to the head and from cuts inside her mouth. On Sunday, November 10th, the police located the car Lord Lucan had been driving. It was found near the English Channel at the south coast port of Newhaven, 60 miles from London. The car was a Ford Corsair Lucan had borrowed from a friend about 2 weeks before. The front seats, dashboard, glove box, and steering wheel were liberally smeared with bloodstains. The trunk contained a 16-inch long piece of lead pipe wrapped in adhesive tape, which proved to have been cut from the same original length of pipe as the murder weapon. This pipe was not blood-stained or bent. Lord Lucan was nowhere to be found and has never been seen since. The car was said to have been parked and abandoned in the early morning hours following the murder. 2 fishermen claimed to have seen a man of Lord Lucan's description near the channel at about the same time. All this provided a fairly tidy package in which to wrap the official theory of the case. Lord Lucan, as the theory goes, let himself into his own house with his own key and waited in the basement, knowing his wife's habits and fully expecting her to descend at any time with tea set in hand. The nanny's descent was unexpected, since Lucan would have assumed she had the night off, meaning he either mistook the nanny for his wife in the dark, or decided he had to kill her anyway, then stuffed her in the mailbag, and resumed waiting for his wife to come down. When she did, he tried to kill her too, but failed. The mailbag was there because Lucan's plan had been to cart off Lady Lucan's body in the back of the borrowed car, which had a larger trunk than his own Mercedes, and drive it to New Haven. There he would transfer the body to a speedboat he owned, weight it down, and sink it in the channel. He was well familiar with the channel and its varying depths from his speedboat racing days. If the murder had gone as planned, Lady Lucan would have simply turned up missing. There would have been no body and therefore no murder case. There were suggestions that she may have attempted suicide at least once, and people might well think she had simply wandered off. This theory was given more substance by reports gathered from the more cooperative of Lucan's acquaintances. One said Lucan had spoken of solving his financial problems by killing Veronica, and another gave a second-hand account that suggested he had actually rehearsed the dumping of the body in the channel. All these well-laid plans were ruined by the appearance of Sandra Rivet on the basement stairs. 2 vanishing acts would have been a bit much. The police theorized that after failing to kill his wife, Lucan panicked and set out for the coast without any body in his trunk, then either killed himself or went into hiding. There are some serious problems with the official theory. The most glaring is the choice of murder weapon. Murder with a piece of lead pipe is a very messy business, and a blood-spattered basement is hardly consistent with an unexplained disappearance. With his children upstairs, Lucan certainly could not have allowed in his plan for the time to mop up as thoroughly as would have been required after so violent an attack. Still, what was the big mailbag for, if not to carry off a body? Lucky Lucan has never had the opportunity to defend himself at a trial. His version of events is known only through accounts of one face-to-face conversation he had with a friend, 2 phone conversations with his mother, and 3 letters he wrote in haste before his disappearance. Shortly after his wife ran into the plumber's arms, Lucan apparently arrived on the doorstep of a friend named Madeleine Florman, who lived near his house in Chester Square. Mrs. Florman's children attended school with the Lucan children. She reported hearing her doorbell ring at length just before 10 p.m. that Thursday night. She was alone in her house and afraid to go to the door, so she didn't answer. A short while later, Mrs. Florman received a phone call from a man who didn't identify himself. She was sure the voice on the other end was Lord Lucan's, but claims to remember nothing of his remarks except that they were incoherent. Bloodstains were later found on the Florman doorstep. At about the same time, Lord Lucan called his mother, told her there had been a horrible catastrophe at the house on Lower Belgrave, and asked her to go and take care of the children. He said that both Veronica and the nanny had been badly injured. He explained that he had been passing the house, as was his frequent habit, and had happened to look in through the blinds into the basement. There he saw his wife trying to fight off the attack of a large man. He entered the house and the man escaped. If he offered a reason why he himself had left the premises, his mother did not report it. The call to his mother was placed sometime between 10 o'clock and 10:25 p.m. She arrived at the house to collect the children at 10:45. Apparently, Lord Lucan got into the Ford Corsair and started driving. He arrived at the home of friends in Uckfield, Sussex, 44 miles from London, at about 11:30 p.m. Susan Maxwell Scott would testify that she had opened the door to a dishevelled Lucan, gave him a drink and listened to a shocking story. Again, he told of passing the house, seeing the fight with the intruder and going inside. This time, he added the detail that he had slipped down in a pool of blood, explaining the wet patch to Mrs. Maxwell Scott that she noticed on his trousers. He had left the scene because his wife had been hysterical and had accused him of hiring the man to kill her. He said Veronica had gotten the idea of a husband using a hired killer to dispose of a troublesome wife from an American TV movie, and had harped on it in the past. He tried to clean her wounds, but she had run from the house while he was in the bathroom. He knew she would tell the police he had tried to kill her, and he had decided the best course was to remove himself from the situation. Mrs. Maxwell Scott said Lucan's story came out in bits. It did not sound rehearsed or made up, and that she believed it. Whilst at the Maxwell Scott house, Lucan again phoned his mother. He asked about the children and learned they were safely installed in bed at his mother's home. The Dowager Lady Lucan told him the police were there and asked if he wanted to talk to them. He said he would contact them in the morning. He asked Mrs. Maxwell Scott for notepaper and wrote 2 letters, marked with bloodstains on the envelopes. Letters were addressed to his friend and brother-in-law Bill Shandkid. Mrs. Maxwell Scott posted them the next day. The first letter said this: "Dear Bill, the most ghastly circumstances arose tonight, which I have described briefly to my mother, when I interrupted the fight at Lower Belgrave Street and the man left. Veronica accused me of having hired him. I took her upstairs and sent Frances to bed and tried to clean her up. She lay doggo for a bit. I went into the bathroom and she left the house. The circumstantial evidence against me is strong in that Veronica will say it was all my doing and I will lie doggo for a while, but I am only concerned about the children. If you can manage it, I would like them to live with you. Veronica has demonstrated her hatred for me in the past and would do anything to see me accused. For George and Francis to go through life knowing their father had been in the dock accused of attempted murder would be too much for them. When they are old enough to understand, explain to them the dream of paranoia and look after them. One curious thing about this letter is that it refers only to attempted murder. The dead nanny is not mentioned. The dream of paranoia alludes to Lady Lucan's alleged mental problems. The second letter to Bill Shandkid dealt with financial matters, giving instructions about family silver to be sold at Christie's and creditors to be paid with the proceeds. After finishing the letters and refusing the offer of a bed for the night, Lord Lucan left the Maxwell Scott house at around 1:15 a.m., presumably headed for New Haven to begin lying doggo. At some point, Lucan wrote a third letter, apparently using notepaper he found in the car he was driving, addressed to the car's owner, Michael Stoop. Stoop was a wealthy businessman and a dedicated backgammon player. He had been a long-time friend of Lucan's and a member of the inner circle at the Claremont Club. Postage on the letter had to be paid because it arrived with no stamp, and the police never knew where it was posted because Stoop had destroyed the envelope. Here is what the letter said. My dear Michael, I have had a traumatic night of unbelievable coincidence. However, I won't bore you with anything or involve you, except to say that when you come across my children, as I hope you will, please tell them that you knew me, and that all I cared about was the children. The fact that a crooked solicitor and a rotten psychiatrist destroyed me between them will be of no importance to the children. I gave Bill Shandkid an account of what really happened, but judging by my last efforts in court, no one, let alone a 67-year-old judge, would believe me. However, I no longer care, except that my children should be protected. This letter, presumably written later in the night, has more of a rambling quality than the letters to Shandkid. Lucan's reluctance to bore, from the events of the night, as though murder was after all a rather humdrum affair, is typical of the icy affectation of his social set. The mention of the solicitor, the psychiatrist and the judge are all references to the custody case. Is the man who wrote this letter a raving maniac hoping to put the best face on things before he disappears, or a victim of unbelievable coincidence and bad luck? The coroner's inquest into the death of Sandra Rivet, held 7 months after the murder, shed some light on this question, and the light did not shine favourably on Lord Lucan. The police explained that the fight in the basement could not have been seen from outside the house, and it could not have happened from a disturbing vision of his wife being attacked as he claimed. But there is a further difficulty. It was Sandra Rivet, not Veronica Lucan, who was attacked in the basement, and Sandra was attacked at least 15 minutes before Lady Lucan. Forensic testimony from the police authority on blood groups confirmed that there had been 2 main areas of violence in the Lucan house that night: the basement and the ground floor hall. Blood in the basement was type B, Sandra's type. Blood in the hall on the ground floor was type A, Lady Lucan's type. Oddly, a bit of type A blood was found on the US mailbag that held Sandra's body. The bloody and bent lead pipe held both blood types on its surface, and both blood types were found in the abandoned Ford Corsair. The clear implication was that the same lead pipe had killed both women, and whoever rode in the car had either attacked or handled both women. At the same time, the testimony of the medical expert created a new puzzle in the case. Using relatively new fibre identification techniques, the expert had established to her satisfaction that traces of the same grey-blue wool fibres were found in the basement. This suggested a direct connection between Lord Lucan and the murder weapon, an important connection because there were no fingerprints in Lady Lucan's well-turned phrase, "Her attacker had thrust 3 gloved fingers down my throat." It appeared that Lord Lucan's no doubt stylish garment made him look like a murderer. But the curious thing about all this was where the grey-blue wool fibres were not found. They were not found on the US mailbag or on Sandra Rivet's body. Lucan appeared to be leaving a trail of wool fibres everywhere he went. Could he have killed Sandra and stuffed her in a mailbag without brushing up against the bag in the process? Then there was the problem of time. Using the telephone, Lord Lucan had reserved a table for 4 at the Claremont Club that night. He had invited several of his friends to join him for dinner after they attended a theatre performance. The dinner reservation had been placed at about 8:30 p.m. At around 8:45, Lucan drove by the Claremont and spoke to the doorman through the rolled-down window of his Mercedes, asking if any of his friends had arrived. The Mercedes was later found, devoid of bloodstains, at the flat on Elizabeth Street. If the official theory is right, Lucan would have wanted to be waiting in the basement when his wife descended the stairs to make her tea, just before 9 p.m. Lady Lucan said Sandra Rivet went down for the tea about 8:55. Her daughter Lady Frances, using TV programs as her guide, which put the time about 15 minutes earlier. In either case, Lucan would have had to perform a challenging act of moving through space. He would have had to drive through 2 miles of city traffic from the Claremont to his flat, park the Mercedes and pick up his lead pipe and mailbag, walk or drive in the Ford the half-mile to the house on Lower Belgrave Street, let himself in, unscrew the light bulb and stand waiting to attack, all in 10 minutes if you accept Lady Lucan's timing, and in less than no time if you accept Lady Frances's. Of course it can be argued that Lucan drove by the Claremont when he did precisely for the purpose of establishing an alibi, but by doing so, he would have been cutting things perilously thin. If the Claremont doorman had his time right, it would have been difficult for Lord Lucan to have killed Sandra Rivet. On the other hand, the sighting at the Claremont does not work entirely in Lord Lucan's favour. He told Mrs. Maxwell Smith he was passing the house on Lower Belgrave on his way to change for dinner. but the house is between the Claremont and the flat, on Elizabeth Street. Since the unstained Mercedes was found parked at the flat, Lucan could not have been casually passing on his way to change clothes. He had to be making a special trip out of his way, past the house on Lower Belgrave. The coroner's inquest was essentially a one-sided affair. Lucan's side of things was presented only through the readings of his last 3 letters and the testimony of those he had spoken to. No one developed and presented his case, and without a defense, the evidence against him was convincing. For the last time in England, a jury in an inquest not only established a cause of death, but named a party responsible. Lord Lucan was identified as the murderer of Sandra Rivet and bound over for trial. 1 month later, a bill was introduced in Parliament to limit the power of coroners' courts and prevent them from naming a responsible party. The bill, later passed, was inspired by the Lucan inquest. The inquest verdict did not sway the opinions of Lucan's highly opinionated friends. With very few exceptions, they had closed ranks to protect Lucky's interests in the face of the scandal. Sometimes referred to in the press as members of the Eton Mafia, these people swore for public consumption they were convinced of Lucan's innocence. But there was within their attitudes the strong suggestion that they would protect him even if he was guilty as hell. 7 of Lucan's friends held a meeting at the Claremont Club the day news of the murder broke, to discuss how to handle the situation and how to get money or other help to Lucan, if he should request it. At least this was the business of the meeting as reported to the press. Could Lucan have already been receiving help in making his escape? And could this have been the real purpose of the Claremont meeting? This question must have crossed the minds of the Scotland Yard detectives, who set off scouring the world in search of the elusive aristocrat. It appeared that Lord Lucan had dematerialised in New Haven, somewhere between the parked Ford and the English Channel. Those who thought he had committed suicide speculated that he might have travelled out into the deepest part of the Channel in his speedboat, opened the drain plug, tied himself aboard, and gone down to a watery grave. An even more imaginative theory held that Lucan killed himself like one of the noble Romans he admired, and then was fed by his devoted friends to John Aspinall's tigers. In any case, no body has ever been found. This was not for lack of effort. Shortly after the abandoned car was spotted, 14 divers searched New Haven Harbour and nearby coves and rock pools, while 14 dogs sniffed the passages of a Napoleonic fort that overlooks the harbour from a cliff top. It is more fun to suppose that Lucky Lucan is still alive, playing nightly high-stakes games in some exotic outpost under cover of a new identity and savouring the romantic grief of exile. There is in fact more to support this assumption than the suicide idea. None of Lucan's farewell letters reads like a suicide note. In fact, the closest he comes to revealing his plans is when he says, "I will lie doggo for a while." Lucan's tight circle of patrician friends were close, loyal and rich. They tended to look at the world as a few of us against a lot of them. They had connections around the globe, ready resources to support a man on the run, and they had made it clear that they would help Lucky in any way they could. There has been no shortage of Lord Lucan's sightings to encourage those who believe Lucky is alive. Some of these have appeared to have some substance. In June of 1975, 2 Scotland Yard detectives travelled to the French port of Cherbourg, where Lucan had reportedly been staying at the Grand Hotel near the harbour bridge. The hotel owner and several members of the hotel staff positively identified a photo of Lucan as the man who had checked in and out of the hotel 3 times between March and May. Lucan was said to have friends in this area of France. This report was dismissed as nonsense by Lucan's friends in England, because the hotel owner said her guest an insomniac who appeared to be laboring under great stress, spoke fluent French. In January of 1978, Scotland Yard checked out a story that a British citizen living in Barbados was sending money to Lucky Lucan, who was then living in South America. In 1982, Lucan was supposed to be in the Caribbean. The fact that none of these sightings resulted in an arrest does not rule out the possibility that Lord Lucan may be alive today. Thanks to the glory days of the British Empire, there are any number of quite livable places throughout the world where an Englishman with the proper upbringing could live and prosper without drawing undue attention. The Scotland Yard file on Lord Lucan remains open. He has never been declared officially dead. Under British law, this would require a request from his family, and the request has not been forthcoming. One consequence of this is that his son George has not yet taken his seat in the House of Lords. Occasional Lucan sightings are still reported and duly noted in the ever-thickening file. The evidence against Lucan is all but overwhelming, and the version of events he offered cannot be supported by the facts. The discrepancies in forensics and timing suggest he may have had an accomplice who killed Sandra Rivet. It is much easier to believe a paid hitman could have mistaken the nanny for Lady Lucan. Lucan could have arrived at the house a few minutes after the killing and found his wife still alive and himself the victim of incredible bad luck. This would explain why he referred only to attempted murder as a crime he might be charged with in his letter to Bill Shand Kidd. Still, the existence of a hitman is pure speculation, without so much as an underground rumor to support it. Whether he suffered from a poor choice of helpers or an unbelievable coincidence, it appears that Lucky Lucan gambled all he had, that fateful Thursday night in London, and he lost. Hi again. If you liked the story and would like some more, could you please subscribe and ring the bell, as more stories will soon be uploaded. And once again, thank you.